business venture outside of this country, really getting an attorney is money well spent, who's really versed in the current interpretation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. There's currently, the last 2 or 3 years, there's been legislation proposed on the federal level. Like most of the legislation, nobody can agree. And so it remains a very nebulous concept, and just defining what is acceptable and not acceptable, and not leave it up to the fiat of the various agencies in the U.S. So that's really what I want to talk about, foreign corrupt practices.
So why don't we talk a little bit about what we see as keys to success? What do we think has worked for us to make us successful? And so one of the things that we'll start with is your resources of your company, your personnel, and how you portray your personnel and your company to those outside.
This gets back to why Cleellum, and how do we successfully portray this business from Cleellum. We instill this attention, almost fanatical attention to detail. And when we make a mistake, we admit it. It's surprising how many clients try, or service business try to finesse making mistakes. Our attitude has always been fess up to the mistakes, take your lumps, and the client will be much less likely to take a large lump. He'll take a small lump, and most likely will hire you again because of your attention and forthrightness. They've come to expect that from American firms. In certain sectors, the construction and engineering area is not one of those, and so as a result, they find it very refreshing. And so we have traded on that success very, very frequently. We do it in a subtle way. Resources also mean what other, besides the personnel and the type of personnel, what kind of physical resources. Kittitas County doesn't have the resources of a Sao Paulo or a Seattle or a Melbourne, Australia, but it does have aspects of much of what we want. I'd rather have a T2 line. We have a T1 line to service our servers. We have a complete video conference center in Cleellum. And I hold these video conferences with the chief economist in London of Deutsche Bank, and in Tokyo with Nomura. I do them in opposite weeks. On Monday morning, it turns out to be 7 o'clock in the morning with me, whether I'm talking to London or whether I'm talking to Tokyo. Just happens to be different days because the date line is in between. And we have a very easy time without going overseas. Now, we're going to talk about, and I'll let Pat talk about how important it is, and I'll get back to the resources, but how important it is to be visible to overseas clients, and what that means from a cost of starting up a service business that wants to go global, and how that factors into the equation.
There is, despite the fact that we are in a very interesting age of Facebook and Twitter, where everyone perceives, and to some extent even believes, that you can carry on a relationship with Facebook, is really, really underestimating what it takes to actually do business. When it comes down to actually having an agreement with somebody where they want to know whether they can trust you, whether they want to know whether you are credible, whether they...
Real.
real, whether they can actually physically have a discussion with you one-on-one and see how you are going to react, your mannerism, your behavior, your confidence, your ability to look them in the eye, which goes to trust and to honesty, cannot be done on Facebook or Twitter. So that is the relationship, but how do you then get to that relationship? Well, there are two ways to be seen. There is the non-visual way to be seen to build credibility, and there's the visual way to be seen to build credibility, and you need to do both. So one way to start, and I understand that here at CWU, you're actually as students, if you're in the room, have great opportunities to do this, and you're in a great place to have the ability to have what's called co-authors, and that is peer-reviewed journals. Peer-reviewed journals in a particular industry carry a lot of weight when it comes to credibility.
Especially overseas.
Because you have, one, taken the time to write about something that's innovative that a journal is not going to publish if it's like, been there, done that, ho-hum, everybody knows about this. Journals don't do that. Journals are trying to publish things that are new, cutting edge, something that their readers want to buy the journal because they're going to learn something. Two, a journal, peer-reviewed, means that when you submit the manuscript, it is going to go through reviewers that will be anonymous to you, but are going to critically review what you are submitting. And reviewers, by the way, are given three choices. They're actually given, excellent paper, because journals are always looking for papers to give awards to. They're looking for accepted to publish as is, accepted to publish with the following revisions, or can be published as long as the author redoes, gets resubmitted, or there's that last option that a lot of people forget, and it says reject. Journals do not have to submit and do not have to take your article. So peer-reviewed articles build a lot of credibility overseas, and they build a lot of credibility for you as an individual to establish your knowledge in an area and to establish your own credibility.
Now, peer-reviewed papers we treat in the U.S. as an academic exercise. They're only important to academia.
Well, that's perception, but
Yes.
Unfortunately that's not true. I mean, here, even in the United States, you shouldn't think of only publishing for the academic world. Publishing is really important to establish your credibility professionally, whether you are in the academic world or you are in the private sector, even if you're in a government sector. When it comes to thinking of who's going to move up the ladder to be in that next leadership position, they're going to look to what has that individual done as an individual to allow them to hold that position. Now, the second area is the visual aspect. Now, how do you get yourself visually known for the first time? This is where conferences come into play. Conferences, seminars, workshop, and again, you're not looking to go on a junket to the Caribbean where you're going to be on the beach all day. If you're going to invest your time to be visual, it's going to take money, time, and the time, again, it's not going to a place because you're really wanting to see the place, and in fact, you're probably going to see very little of the place outside the hotel or the venue where the conference is, because your whole point of going is to be seen and to network. And to the extent that you can work both of these concepts together, a concept that we have always worked with very well, is if you get something published in a journal, for a professional organization that just happens to give conferences on a certain topic, there is an increased probability that you can then give that paper results at the conference as a speaker. And if you can do that, you have built your credibility two ways, because now you actually become a subject matter expert where people are in the room, like you're in here, to listen to someone is speaking. And if anybody spends their time to actually listen to you, then they have considered that a personal value of their time and investment to hear what you have to say. So that really builds your credibility. But again, this is why the focus, you can't be everywhere, and you really have to decide what it is you're going to sell, where you're going to sell it, who you want to reach out to get to both those journals and those venues of where you're going to do that.
It's not one time, though. Especially in Asia, we find this is, take the 1990s. From the beginning of the 90s, Asia was a hot market. Then Southeast Asia in particular had the so-called Asian flu in '96, and the economy went in the toilet for most countries. Then they started to recover about 99, 2000. We didn't abandon our projects in Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia at that time. They were dried up, but we continued to go to conferences. It's very expensive. But then that conveyed to the Asians that we didn't just want their business. We were truly interested in their economies and what the companies and the governments wanted. And that paid off in dividends in the last decade because we've gotten a lot of business from those countries. So when you're starting out a service business, you have to realize that you're going to spend a lot of time away from the Kittitas Valley. As enjoyable as the Kittitas Valley is, and I always enjoy coming back more and more times, you're going to spend approximately 50% of your time, if you want to do international business, going overseas, despite the fact that we have a video conference center. Used to be 75, 80%, now it's down to 50%. And that's a combination of actually doing the work as well as marketing the work. They've got to see your face. And I want to emphasize something that Pat said. It's not all about Twitter or Facebook. There's very few countries and the people that you're going to sell to in these countries that are on Facebook or Twitter.
They may be from their social network for their families and to put their pictures, but that's not how they do business.
And so there may be an opportunity in the next decade to translate the current marketing themes on Twitter and Facebook to the international markets, but it's not at the current time, and there's no one doing it successfully.
Yeah, and I will just add, I mean, I do want to make a clarification and a qualification on that. If you're selling a product, that's quite different, because product-based marketing is now very much internet-focused, and obviously Facebook and tweets about, you know, whether you liked the product, didn't like the product. But when it comes to selling a service, it's not really about the company. It is about the people. And you can have a great company with a great reputation name and still have a few bad eggs in the basket. And so companies, when they're going to expend a lot of money for you to come in to make them better, or to improve something, or to correct something, or even to defend them, if you're in the construction industry on a dispute, they want to know who it is that is going to do that. And so that will become very, very important. And that gets to kind of the resources and what Kris wanted to add relative to resources.
So the resources are very important. The people and that are in your firm, in your service business, have to relate to the people overseas and to the services that you're trying to sell. Now, there's one other aspect of the service. It must be value added, and a big value added, to sell it overseas. So think about it. Management, despite what everyone says, the world looks up to U.S. management. This just has to be adapted to the particular country, and that's where I talk about listening and focusing. For instance, in the audits that we do is very simple, because the standards and the journal articles that are written in the U.S. are looked upon as primary standards, industry practices. So we judge and go in and evaluate foreign governments, foreign firms, whether they have processes and procedures in place, whether they meet industry standards, and are they dynamic enough to change with the changes that are going on in industry standards? Do they have the personnel? Have they implemented the standards? And then we get back to where we started. So all of this plays together in a very focused way. You were going to...
Oh, I was just going to say on resources, the other thing, being in Cle Elum,
Yes.
we're not huge companies, right? We're not the 50 and the 100 and the 200 or even 1,000 person companies. So how do you make yourself look larger than you actually are? Well, part of what you can do is that in our concept, which we're more than pleased to share with everybody, is that our concept is for what we're selling to senior management and boards, is they want advice from people who have, quote, been there, done that. They would like to really hear from somebody that spent their career in a certain area, what went right, what went wrong, and why. And how can they learn from that? And so in that respect, we have a cadre of individuals that we have actually worked with over our career, many of those people having worked on some of the largest projects in the world, many of those people actually having been presidents of their companies, CEOs of their companies, having been the project director of the various largest companies, and so they're, quote, semi-retired, or they try to be retired. Unfortunately, we sometimes get them involved in engagements where they probably have to work harder now for us on an engagement that they have in the last 10 years of their life. But what we can offer when we are given a particular matter, and for instance, a utility audit that we did last year, we brought in a team of individuals, one who had designed some of the largest power plants in the world at the top level, managing that design. He became part of our team. Another gentleman who was controller for one of the largest utilities in the country, he was part of our team. And we were able to bring them in to our team to complement our particular backgrounds. And that's what the clients found very, very valuable. And so we don't have them, here's your financial aspect, okay, so they're not employees of ours, they're not on our payroll, but we have a standard consulting agreement. We treat all, and this is very important as well, something that actually wasn't on our list, but I think it's important enough to say, is that treating people well is the most important thing you can do in a service industry. And if you are going to especially use consultants, you can't start playing games with your consultants. I have seen companies try to think, oh, wow, we can get so-and-so for only $50 an hour. Oh, my gosh, that other person's going to charge us $275 an hour. Let's not make sure we don't share the agreements with them because we're going to make so much more money off this person, yet we're going to charge them the same hourly rate to our clients. Let me tell you, it's a small world out there. And it won't take long for people to recognize that you're treating people differently. And it will come back to bite you. We treat everyone the exact same way, and we tell them that. And if that's not enough for them, then they shouldn't come work for us. But believe it or not, we will have consultants that will take special assignments with us, even though individually they might make more on an hourly basis. for just the fun of working on one of those very unique or largest projects in the world that they want to be part of. And so it is more than just, quote, the dollars. It is about the experience. It is about who you will meet. It's about who you're going to know. But I just wanted to add that as
Yeah,
well.
well, what Pat was getting at, our business model only has 2 rates, which is very unique for a service firm, a management consulting firm. We charge 1 rate for senior people and 1 rate for support people. And it could be Pat, it could be me, it could be our Chief Operating Officer, Jack, it could be anyone, and one of our consultants. So we're all charged at the same rate. And we pay the consultant 2/3 of what the hourly rate is, provided we're not working on a fixed fee. And we pay the consultant that amount, but
Then we may have to fix hours, you know.
Yes.
It's a different model, but
we do very little fixed fee work. So it's kind of a cross between a professional service firm like a law firm or an engineering firm, but we treat everyone the same. So as Pat was saying, these 2 individuals, the client was really impressed, but they've worked with us as part of our teams for 20 years. And the camaraderie and the great work was conveyed by the enthusiasm of the personnel that were engaged by us. And how much time?
well, I would like to have some time for questions, right? So we've got,
You're fine. You want to finish this slide?
Yeah.
well, I think we're done with this. Well, I keep wanting to switch it because now it's women working
Oh, yeah.
overseas.
Well,
so-
I'll talk about women working overseas. I'm talking about that subject because she's obviously a woman.
Really? Sorry.
Women have inherent advantages overseas. You'd be surprised that I would say that. Japan. They like women in Japan, but they don't like women in Japan in business. But believe it or not, we have an easier time sending women professionals over to Japan than male professionals because they're not Japanese. And it also helps that she's the only blonde in the country at that time. All Japanese men like to have their picture taken with blonde women.
Sorry, they'll laugh and tell you it's true.
But take Saudi Arabia as well. Now, we don't send women to Saudi Arabia because women can only talk to men 1 month of the year. Social month. Happens to be the month of June. And they have to be dressed from head to toe in the proper dress. Now, that's fine for women in Saudi Arabia, but taking Pat, putting her into Saudi Arabia would not be a good idea. She's too independent.
Yeah, this is where the culture comes in. This is where my personality probably just wouldn't work.
But yet, going to the Persian Gulf countries, the Emirates, there's no problem working in the Emirates.
And this is why we said you have to know your country. You cannot stereotype and say all the Middle East is alike. That is such an untrue statement. I worked extensively in Kuwait. I worked extensively in Dubai. I worked extensively in Abu Dhabi. I worked extensively in Bahrain. I had zero problem, and I did not have to wear any special dress. But I knew my clients. I knew how to still act. I knew still how to dress as an American, but, sleeves down to here, collars up to here, skirts down to the floor. But this is all about knowing what the differences are. So just don't stereotype, and don't also think that just because a certain region of the world may have a perceived negativity to it, does not necessarily mean that all the countries in that particular region act the same culturally.
Now, Japan is much different for women than China, for instance, or Southeast Asian countries, because they are predominantly matriarchal societies, and they have had women in business for years. And so, actually, our women do better in the rest of Asia for a different reason than they do well in Japan. It's just totally opposite.
And another example, I mean, there is a perception in the United States, because it is a true fact in the United States, that despite the fact we're up to 19.1% of women in the universities in engineering, we are still at only 10% of women in the workforce in engineering. That percent is true for the UK, and that percent is also true for Australia. Of course, one could ask what those three countries have in common, and they probably started as a Brit underlying foundation. However, you would think that if you were in a country, for instance,